A lot of us who love reptiles love to hold them, to handle them, and interact with them. But some of us only want something beautiful that looks great in their living room or their basement. I'm one of those guys too. And today, we're going to talk about the top 5 display animals you want to look at, but probably not to touch. My name's Adam, this is Diamond, you're watching Wickens Wicked Reptiles. Stick around. Yeah, those are frogs. Okay, run the intro. They're not going to make the list, but what you heard there were White's tree frogs. They're great for display. They move around a bunch. They're fun. They're cool. They're actually going to talk about them in the video on Thursday, but they're not on today's list. Today, I want to talk about animals that do great in display enclosures. So for example, if you want to say a dart frog, which won't be on the list because this is actually part 2. Talked about them already. Dart frogs are great because you can put them in a display enclosure, and if you're somebody who likes, living art that changes all the time, so plants, like something like that's behind me right now, that's for a display animal or display animals, which we'll talk about, that has plants everywhere, and the animals you're not gonna really want to take out, and sometimes they're small or too flighty or bitey or whatever the reason is, but they're beautiful for you to look at and feed, and they're not impossible to interact with if you want to. That's what this video is for. So there's not going to be corn snakes or ball pythons or bearded dragons or anything like that. So let's just get going. Number 5. We don't talk about them enough. Lygodactylus williamsi. Now in English, well that is technically, was Latin sort of. Either way, the common name, electric blue day geckos or turquoise geckos, or some people call them electric blue cave geckos, even though they don't live in caves. They live on a specific type of tree with specific lengths of leaves in an 8-kilometer radius in Tanzania, and that's it. Like literally an 8-kilometer radius in Tanzania. Like some of your favorite pop artists or rappers have properties bigger than the entire range where you can find these things in the wild. So they are critically endangered. You can only find them in one place on one specific tree, more or less. But in captivity, they do really, really well if you don't handle them. And as the name suggests, they're an electric blue gecko. So the males are electric blue. They're beautiful, they're amazing. And because they move all the time, they're really fun to look at. And if you have an enclosure that say is really big and you wanted to have a bunch of plants and you wanted an animal that's gonna move around it, I think that's a great option and a better option than something like, I don't know, an anole species. I love anoles. They're great, but they're kind of boring because everybody has them. If you want something a little bit different, although a little bit more expensive, I think a williamsi is kind of perfect for the job. Plus, they eat insects and they eat a prepared diet as well, so really easy to feed. And the temperatures and the humidity are really easy also to keep up with. And I know I said that they're critically endangered, but don't worry. Most of the ones, or all of the ones that I know of that you'll find in captivity, were captive born and bred. There are guys out there like Frank Payne who's bred over 1,000 of these things. I've got friends here in Canada who breed them as well. But the reason that you wouldn't want to handle them is just they're too flighty and they're really fragile. And being a day gecko, although they're in the Lygodactylus family instead of Phelsuma, which we might talk about, we'll see, I believe they do drop their tails, and realistically just they're not a handling animal. It's not what they're for. But they're really fun to look at. Plus, if you wanted a big enclosure, let's suppose, like for example, I talk about this channel so much. A Life Exotic, they built a greenhouse. It's bigger than the room that you're sitting in right now, probably. And they have Lygodactylus williamsi along with a bunch of other species. For example, the enclosure behind me is about 1,500 gallons. I could easily put Lygodactylus in here with the animals that are in here, but that's not the species I chose. I chose anoles because, I wanted 5 of them, and 5 anoles cost something like $50 to $80, whereas the blue geckos, they cost about $200 or $250 each here. So it was a cost prohibitive thing for me. Diurnal, bold, active, awesome. Also, by the way, just don't go cohabiting Lygodactylus with anything. Like, do your research, certain animals will eat them. Number 4, chameleons. Now, of course, chameleons can be handled, but most species are intolerant of it, and I don't recommend getting a chameleon if your main objective is to handle it. If your main objective is to handle a lizard, get something like a bearded dragon. Even a leopard gecko would be great for handling. They're really tolerant of it. Get I don't know, if you want something big and you're really, that keeper who really loves animals and has a really big space, get an iguana, get a Fiji banded iguana if it's legal in your area. There's so many options. Mountain horn dragons, we talk about them all the time, including next week. So I think that there's so so many options, but chameleons are more to look at and then move them around if you need to. And chameleons, don't get me wrong, are fragile, but in my experience, speaking to literally thousands of people at this point about animals, most people who want a display-only animal, they're a different breed of keeper and I know I'm kind of generalizing and painting with a broad brush here, but generally these are people who take meticulous care of the enclosure, which means usually these animals get the perfect care in terms of husbandry, humidity, lighting, things like that. And you can actually have these guys in bigger enclosures with live plants, but of course give them lots of places to actually rest on, because if you get a bigger species, they can destroy your plants. For example, if you wanted a carpet chameleon, you can have a smaller enclosure, of course. If you wanted something like a Parsons chameleon, you're gonna need a much larger enclosure. Parsons chameleon's arguably the biggest chameleon on Earth. So I think that it's really fun because you can have, say a Brachysia, which is a very small chameleon that you can keep, multiple of in a 4x2x2 if you wanted. You can definitely keep them in a 20-gallon tall if you wanted just one. And then there's also, the orange eye or even the big giant yellow Parsons chameleons, which are really cool. So they're varied. Panther chameleons are amazing. Jackson's chameleons are amazing. You can't go wrong with a chameleon as long as you really know what you're doing and make sure that you get all the right information. I'm not the channel for that. I'm not the chameleon guy, but there's a lot of great ones. Number 3, turtles. So I'm saying turtles, and I know that tortoises are turtles, so someone's gonna say in the comment, well, what about tortoises? I'm talking mostly about aquatic turtles. I definitely wouldn't recommend just going and handling your cherryhead or sulcata all the time. Not that most of us are strong enough to handle an adult sulcata tortoise, but either way, they're not really built for handling. I mean, you can hang out with them and pet them and move them around for pictures, but you're not really gonna have what is essentially a boulder with arms and a head on your lap moving around like a bearded dragon, And I know most people are thinking, well, what about salmonella? He's gonna talk, well, I hate to break it to you. Turtles are no more likely to give you salmonella poisoning than a bearded dragon or your dog, by the way. So yes, always wash your hands after touching animals, but that would include your dog too. And I know some of us kiss our dog on the face. I do that. I mean, I know it's disgusting, but I don't care. I love them. But in general, I would say keep the animals away from your mouth, no matter what the species. So don't worry about the salmonella thing as much. Just simply, most aquatic turtles don't want to be out of water or don't want to be in a place where they can't get back into the water, for example. And even if we're talking about box turtles, which are not a tortoise, but they are not an aquatic turtle, they are a turtle that likes the land, they don't really want to be held up. I mean, it's uncomfortable for a turtle. And even though you think they're robust and have these big armored shells, not really. I don't know if you knew this, but they're not in their shells. They're attached to their shells. This is what their skeleton looks like. Most people don't know that. And in fact, I didn't know that until, a few years ago maybe 10, 15 years ago. But I went my whole, life into adulthood not knowing that. So they are fragile. If you drop them and they crack their shell, they're not a hermit crab. They can't go get another one. Anyway, there's really nothing in it for you. There's nothing in it for the turtle, but they're really good displays. I used to have aquatic turtles in my living room and they would just swim around all the time. There's fish in there. And then I don't know if you watched this video here, but I had thousands of dollars worth of water damage, which was all my fault, by the way. But maybe I'm not careful enough or have enough attention to detail to care for turtles. So they are with a great home now, and I no longer have aquatic pets. Number 2, Amazon tree boas. I have a Patreon supporter who I know right now is screaming at her phone watching this. I know there are many subscribers who have left me comments saying, not all Amazon tree boas are out to get ya. And I agree. Some Amazon tree boas can actually be tamed out and handled just like a ball python. Some of them, just like some humans, grow to be 7.5 feet tall. Like, it's literally that rare. And I know people will say, if you work on them, blah, blah, blah. But it's not even just the fact that they're really bitey by nature in general. But think about it. Would you be bitey? Imagine you're skinny, very skinny. I mean, they might be 5 to 7 feet long, but they're really skinny in comparison to other arboreal snakes. The emerald is much bigger and more robust, where the Amazons are generally much, much smaller in terms, thinner in build. So they're fragile. So even if you don't mind getting lit up by these guys, which most of them will, by the way, not that they're mean, they're just defensive. They're trying to protect themselves. You're big and they're not. They're fragile. So you have to be really careful with the way you handle them, especially until they're adults. Now, in terms of an animal to look at, they're nocturnal or crepuscular, so they're not going to be out during the middle of the day. but they will curl up in the open in the middle of the day. I know if you're thinking, I just rather, an emerald or a chondro, those are all amazing too. I mean, green tree pythons fit the bill, and so do emerald tree boas. Anyway, these are a different thing, found in a different part of the Amazon, and they have a bunch of different morphs. They're fantastic, they're cool, they can be tamed out, but even if you do, be careful. And in general, I think as a rule, as a blanket, it is much better to treat these animals as a display that's going to be grooving around the enclosure. And because they can only, realistically, if you get a male especially, maybe will be a pound at full weight. Females have been recorded up to 3 pounds, but that's kind of rare. They're not going to destroy your plants. So I hate to plug my videos, but there's another video right here, which my retics destroyed this enclosure. So if you want arboreal snakes that won't destroy a planted enclosure, Amazon tree boas are probably top notch, a really good option, unless of course you wanted a rhino rat snake or something, but they're not gonna make the list because they're pretty handleable. Number 1, day geckos, but we're talking about Phelsuma. And I don't really like to get, too much into the genuses and things like that because this is a hobby channel. It's not for nerds mostly. Although if you're a nerd, thanks for showing up, appreciate it. You could teach me a lot of things. Every time I go herping in the world, everybody around me knows the Latin names, and I have to look them up. Anyway, Phelsuma, know that one, because I went to Madagascar with my friends, a lot of them nerds, not too long ago, about a year ago, and we found all sorts of Phelsuma. I think there's 42 different species. Not all of them are from Madagascar, but the ones that we know and love, most of them, such as Phelsuma grandis, okay, let's just do common names here, giant day geckos, the limed day geckos, peacock day geckos, gold dust day geckos, the really common ones in the pet trade. They're all very flighty. All of them can lose their tail, and some of them will rip off their skin in order to get away with you. Get away with you? Get away from you. So they're not good for handling. Not to say that you can't ever handle them. I've definitely seen, actually, at the last expo I was at, I saw somebody with a Phelsuma grandis just walking around and handling. I promise you, this is as rare as a 7.5-foot human. You're not going to get a Phelsuma grandis like that unless you do tons of work and start out with the right one. But they move around a lot during the day. They're all diurnal. They move around very quickly, and it's almost spastically the way they walk around. They jump, they scurry, they're beautiful. Some of them are so vibrant and I love them. I have a pair of giant day geckos, the Phelsuma grandis, which were actually in here until recently, but I changed out the species and they're not gonna fit in there. We'll talk about that in another video. So all the Phelsuma, all the day geckos, I think make really great displays just because they are everything a display should be. You can have plants in there, they're beautiful to look at, they're fun to watch, and a lot of them are small enough, you don't need a huge enclosure. I mean, if you get the grandis, you probably want something 36, 36, 18, like one of the big front opening enclosures from Zoomed or the other companies. But if you have, say, I don't know, a gold dust day gecko or peacock day gecko, they're much, much smaller, so you can actually have them in smaller enclosures. Either way, I think they're awesome. That's my number 1 display animal on this list. But if you want part 3, let me know in the comment section. And while you're down there, please hit the like and subscribe button. Really helps out. If you hit the subscribe button, you'll see the notification for this giant enclosure and what's going in there. It's absolutely amazing. I'm so excited to share it. And as always, thanks to the Patreon supporters. You guys get videos early, discounts on merch. You guys get one-on-ones. I love doing that. And of course, all that for as little as $1 a month. I do videos Mondays and Thursdays. So I'll see you in the next one.